This is your host, Marisol, a expat lifestyle and business coach, bringing you an episode of Roaming the Now, where expat entrepreneurs, coaches, and mentors come together to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the real and raw experience of what it actually means to set out to a new country and build a life and business abroad. Like and subscribe if you found some value in this episode, and check out the links in the description. You can find the link to get the Roaming the Now episodes delivered directly to your inbox in the description below. Hello, this is Marisol, your host of Roaming the Now, and today I have Elle McPherson joining us from Argentina.
Hi, so good and happy to be here.
So happy to have you here. So before we jump into today's topic, which is super juicy and like expansive, I love this. I love these topics of conversations. I would love for Ellie to just, introduce yourself and share who you are with the audience.
Sure, my name is Ellie. I am a coach. I live here in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I have for the last couple of years. I run a coaching company called Beyond the Itinerary, which is all about going beyond the so-called itinerary of life. So exploring where there's more pleasure, whether that's in travel, that's in sexuality, that's in spirituality, is going beyond into the space of more that many of us are looking for in life.
Beautiful. Oh, so fun. Okay. No, I don't think I actually ever really talked about this, but pleasure and presence is a really big theme of mine. And even some people have told me I give off that energy of like pleasure and presence. And so I would really love for you to just kind of like, let's dive into it of when we're thinking about pleasure and presence and travel, like what is your concept and take on that?
So I think one reason like people do travel is because it puts them into the now. Like when we're in our day to day, going to work every day in our routines, we can check out. We're not even paying attention. Sometimes you've probably driven somewhere and then got there and realized that you weren't even really paying it. You were daydreaming the whole time. You don't even know how you got there. You were just in the routine of it. So I think one way that travel is really helpful is because it is all new. So it brings you into the present because you have to pay attention to where you're going. And there's so much pleasure then in being open and aware of like, oh my God, the food tastes so good. And like this little cute coffee shop and the trees and the smells. And it brings you very much into the present, into the now, which I think is one reason people enjoy it so much, right? But it's easy in our day-to-day lives to just sort of take that for granted, get distracted and just kind of go on autopilot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually would love to get your take on the situation that happened to me yesterday. So where
Go
I
for
live,
it.
I live in a pueblo Mexico, and where I live, there's kind of just always something new happening. Like there's always something that like isn't open all the time, or something that just opened, or maybe I catch it on a day it's open, right? So yesterday in the morning, I remember passing by this place, and I was just like, I smelt like the most amazing scent of like bread. I don't know what it was. It smelled so good. And so we passed by because we had to go to the market, do our grocery shopping. But then we passed by it again in the afternoon, and I finally said, okay, we need to return and I need to discover what is this smell because it smells so good and I want this. Turned out it was a pizza place. Super delicious. But I would love for you to kind of just from your perspective and what you know with like the senses and pleasure and being in the present moment. What is your kind of take on this, on me just being so fixated on the smell?
I think it's wonderful, right? Like that is like, if you're familiar with the concept of tantra, right? Tantra, kind of people think about tantra like in terms of like Kama Sutra and sex in that way. But tantra is really much about like bringing the spirituality into the everyday. So it's like everything can be erotic and pleasurable if we choose to view it that way. So like that's kind of like kind of out there, right? But that's like, do you remember the scene in American Beauty where there's like that plastic bag floating and it becomes this piece of art?
Mhm.
So that some of that, like the other day I was walking down the street here in Buenos Aires, and there are some days where I'm just like, oh, everything's so beautiful, so magical, and there are days where I am more noticing the trash. But then I was thinking about that movie because it's like it's all just things to notice. And if I take the judgment out of like this smells good, this smells bad, this is beautiful, this is not, it's all just things to notice that can be beautiful, right?
Mhm.
So going back to your thing with the smell, like there was something that was like strong enough attention or strong enough to bring your attention right now into the here and now. Like you probably smell things all the time, but maybe you're used to it or it's not unique enough. But in that moment, it brought you like it woke you up, and then it brought up also this sense of intrigue. Like, oh, I got to find out what that is. I want to go follow that, right? And you teach yoga as well, right? So you like there's that sense of intrigue in the body too. Like, oh, this is something interesting. Let's follow this. So like in the realm of pleasure, it could be like touching your arm, running your fingers through your hair, right? There's all the time. There's smell, there's textures, there's sensations that can catch our attention. And then having that intrigue is to say, oh, like what happens if I follow this? Where is this going to take me? And that's the presence, though, to be in a place where you have to feel safe enough. That's huge, right? Feeling safe in your body to like be able to take that detour and say, where is this going to take me?
Yeah, that's really, like, the way you described that was so clear that I'm like, wow, this is so interesting, right? Because, obviously in that moment, I was thinking like, wow, like I need to follow this. And I am very, like, I am connected to my body. I do a lot of grounding work, but to hear it from more of the perspective, since I know that like this is your like area of expertise of like, no, like what happens is like your senses are triggered and something was strong enough, you were intrigued, you're following the pull. And then obviously I had the pizza, it was amazing. And then I had my moment of pleasure, right?
Yep.
So good.
And the pleasure piece, like there's the pleasure in the smell. There's the pleasure, like this pleasure all the way through. It's not necessarily just the pleasure in eating the pizza. It's the pleasure in like, oh, my attention was caught. The pleasure in like, I wonder what it's going to be. There's the pleasure in the wanting to find out, the pleasure in the anticipation of it. And then there's the pleasure in the eating of the pizza. There's the pleasure in the feeling satiated afterwards, right? All of that journey is full of opportunities to enjoy the pleasure of it.
Yeah. And now I see what you're saying. People who are like really attracted to traveling are attracted to pleasure. Because when you think about when you're traveling, like what I just described, if you're kind of more of a, I'm not a planning traveler, but I'm very much so like following what's being presented to me. And that is what I really love about it's like a flirting, I guess. And when I think about it, the relationship with me traveling, I'm like flirting with my environment. What's catching my attention? What's not? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That's so interesting. My mind is being opened up in so many different ways. I know that we had talked about when you had first traveled and I had first traveled, or just leaving abroad, right? You're going to go abroad. You don't have any plans to return back to, home anytime soon. And this is really the new lifestyle. We had talked about how, I will say this confidently, I actually like structure. Moving around a bunch when I first started traveling really taught me that I need structure, because it was really hard for me to work on my business. And it was really hard for me to just create that sense of safety or that sense of familiarity to have my creativity thrive. And I know that you had experienced a similar experience when you'd first moved abroad and were working on your business. So I would love for you to kind of share more about that, as well as the analogy that you were giving me that I know that we can apply to many things.
Yeah. So I like to think of this as like the banks and the river, right? So the river is like the flow, the creativity, the imagination, the go with, that being able just to follow your nose to whatever is showing up. And then the banks are like the structure, the safety, right? And you need both. So I have applied that concept to a lot of things in my life. As I applied to travel, when I first quit my job and traveled, I had quit my house, quit my job, sold my house. So I was like total free bird, right? And I went traveling for 6 months. And sometimes that going from being a pretty structured person, like in a different life, I was the CFO, CEO of a COO of a company. I like an Excel sheet. I like plan. So to go from having none of that was hard for me. And at times that made me feel like so ungrounded, right? It was like, I could go anywhere. To me, that was like actually not a good feeling. For some people, like that might be the dream, right? I could do anything, I could go anywhere. But then when you're faced with that and you can go anywhere and do anything, for me, it was almost like paralyzing. So the way I learned to work with that was like, okay, I need to put some structure within, so then I have the flexibility. So like for me, when I was backpacking, it was like, well, I have 1 month in each country, right? Based on the visa. So that gave me a little bit. And then I picked what I call like the rocks, like the big experiences. Like back then I wanted to teach yoga. So I got a yoga teaching opportunity. Okay, I know I have to be at this place in 2 weeks, or I want to do this meditation retreat. So I kind of picked like the big experiences I wanted to have, and then let everything else sort of fill itself in. And then a couple times I just like joined a retreat or a training because I was like, I don't want to plan every single day. I kind of wanted like to show up and have someone tell me what to do every day without me having to plan it. So that was that was my way of like putting structure on what otherwise was like a totally open-ended trip that at times felt kind of unsettling in my system. And then, so I came back to the US and then ended up traveling again in a more nomad sense. And when I first started traveling as a nomad, I had, by that point I was working independently, but I had like a contract that was more or less like a full-time job. And so in a way, I was traveling like really frequently back then. In a way, my job was my sense of that was the bank zip. That was the thing. When I opened my laptop, I knew what to do. I didn't have to really think too hard about it. I knew exactly what to do. And that was like my sense of safety, where I didn't have to think about where am I going, where am I going to sleep, how am I going to get there. The job was like, show up, do my thing. When I transitioned out of doing less of that consulting work and more into growing my coaching business, I didn't have the energy, the mental energy to keep moving around so much. And I've seen that with a bunch of other nomads too, right? If your job is really steady and doesn't require a lot of mental thought, then you can be doing all the logistics and the research. Where am I going to stay? How am I going to get there? Where am I going to go? And then when your job, if you switched and you start working more independently or doing something more creative, then you probably need more structure in your day-to-day life, so that you're not constantly thinking about, where am I going to sleep? Where am I going? Where am I going to get internet? Like, that becomes a lot to think about all the time. So that's where like staying somewhere in more 3-6 months, doing the slow mat thing, just takes a lot of that questions out of the mix, so that you can have that mental freedom, that flow state to build, to be creative. So it's like that mix of structure. Like, creativity requires structure, but structure requires creativity.
I had one of my first business coaches said, you're a very creative person, but you need an anchor. You need an anchor for one aspect of your creativity, because when you are a really creative person, like I found it like kind of this really conflicting thought, right? Because as a creative person, you don't really like structure. You don't really like, it's not really something you want, right? I feel like that's why a lot of like creative people I know are like, I want to move abroad, or they do the nomadic thing because they don't want the structure. But when you've experienced that and then you realize, wait, but I actually do need like a container to hold me so that I can like really just intentionally and thoughtfully execute on the creativity, it really just like redefines itself. She had suggested that I like created a dialogue between the part of me that doesn't want structure and the part of me that does. She was like, why do they have to be in conflict? Like, what if they had a conversation? And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, what if my creativity, and like this desire for freedom, but also that desire for safety just had a conversation? Like, how do they come in relationship for each other so they're working together and not like going against me?
Yeah, exactly. Like, an art example that I think of with this is like, let's say you sit down in front of art supplies and you have paint, you have pencils, you have collage, like you have everything in front of you. It's like a little overwhelming. But let's say you sit down with the materials and someone says to you, you can only use blue paint and you can only use like a circle shape, and you have to stay within this part of the paper. Like, the chances are that when you're actually given some constraints, you end up being more creative than if you could have done anything. Like this, or like the other way I think about it is like, if I'm in the grocery store and I can buy like anything, I'm just like, I don't know, there's so many options. But if I open my fridge and I'm like, okay, I've got pickles, I've got some meat, I've got this, I can come up with a really great meal. Like, sometimes it's the constraints that actually make you more creative.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think really as I sit in that space, I'm like, that's very true. Like when you give yourself, like I think about when I was like 5, I went to a private school and every morning we did arts and crafts. But it was very like the arts and craft like skill we were doing was like pre-selected. So it was predetermined. But I remember having so much fun because I was like, okay, cool. I'm like rolling in here. Here's the arts and craft supplies. Today we're sewing. I need to sew something like this, or today we're doing this. Obviously, everyone's art looked different, but there was there was that, I guess we call that container of like, here's your
The container,
materials.
exactly.
Mhm. And I feel like, especially as you're saying, because being a business owner, like you are the container, like you
You have
are,
to make it for yourself. Yeah.
yes. And with that being said, it really is just so important to find, like, as your analogy, like what is going to work for you to create that container of structure so that you can thrive. Because if not, like you're kind of just, for me, I felt like I was just always like paddling, like staying above surface, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that maybe that container is like going to the co-working space and leaving the computer there if like you need to work on boundaries, or having there's groups where they do like co-working sessions, right? Where, okay, we're all just gonna be on our laptops together, but there's a sense that like other people are doing this too. I mean, there's lots of ways, but it's realizing that, like, yes, the creative person generally is like, I don't like boundaries, don't tell me what to do, but then actually kind of needs that sense of safety to say, okay, I don't like the safety that says I can go full in, right? I don't need to I don't need to be worrying, I can just put my attention fully and be creative.
Yeah. I'm curious, since I know that you can, obviously, being expats, we connect with other expats. And how do you see this like play out? Like, just like, in either clients you work with or people that like, how do you typically see this play out when there's like the realization of like they need structure or they need some type of, like they need the base?
Um, how do I see it play out? So I use this analogy when I work with people on all kinds, because I coach people around sexuality stuff, I coach people around financial stuff, like lifestyle design. So it kind of depends like where they're coming to me for, what they need support around. Like I was working with someone recently the other day who was working on going on a sabbatical, right? They were just, it was like too big, right? Too much. They just like, what do I do? Where do I go? Too many ideas. So some of it just like creating that structure to say, okay, within this context, we're going to put an intention on it, put a timeline on it, like something to begin to like make this bite sizable. Okay, or let's put it into phases, right? Okay, phase 1 is this, phase 2 is that. It's that those are different ways that you can kind of like put structure or container on something so that it feels, again, it goes back to this idea of safety. Like you need that sense of safety to like relax into, to say, okay, what's possible. But when it feels too big, too much, it's like that can be like a freeze or a flight kind of response. I can't really handle this. If that makes sense.
No, 100%. It's like taking. I feel like because people right, because I mean when you think about, you made the decision to move to Argentina, right? I made the decision to move to Mexico. I made this decision from this lens of I'm going and I don't have a return ticket and we'll see how much time I get on my visa, right? But I went with it very much so this is just the first step and it's going to play
Yeah.
out as I go along, right? And I feel that a lot of people, when they're stepping into traveling, there's this part of us that wants to figure out the whole thing at once, but that's like really impossible because nothing ever goes as planned.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was working with a client the other day actually, who is a executive director of a nonprofit in the US and wants to move his family abroad, right? So it's not just him, it's his wife and 2 kids. So, and he was like, I don't know where to start. So I was like, so we talked about this idea of phases. Okay, phase 1 is moving out of your house. Phase 2 is landing. And then because I'm big into like, what are the guardrails kind of that you need to be a functioning version of yourself? We talked a lot about that. Okay, like for you, your wife, the 2 kids, like what are the things that they need on a daily basis to have that sense of like safety and that's like, what are the, exercise, meals, getting around, like a safe place to sleep at night. Those are all things that when you're traveling are not like are kind of up for grabs sometimes. So understanding like what are those, my kid needs 8 hours of sleep, no matter what, or they're a hot mess. Or I'm like that. So how do you, when you think about where you're going to go, like that puts some container on it. Okay, we need to be somewhere where I can run every day, because if I don't run, I get really grumpy, let's say. So like I often think that having those senses of like what are the key things that I need to be the best version of me can help put that container on it. Or like for myself, I've had a lot of like, thankfully I'm in an apartment now that I love, but I had like a slew of negative apartment experiences, and I think most nomads can relate to like the struggle with finding good housing. So I had like a really solid list now, like non-negotiables. Like I live in the back of the building, so I don't hear buses. I live in the top floor, so it's like quiet is important to me, right? All of those things are things I had to learn the hard way, but now that's the container of like, okay, I know I need to find a place that has these things, and I don't negotiate on that, because that is really key to my sense of like feeling grounded and safe in my body.
Yeah, that's like I had like a flashback of all the like Airbnbs and places that I moved around. Internet, right? Like internet, like because clearly, our roles, it is highly relying on internet. And so I remember being in Airbnbs where it was unstable internet. And if it was unstable internet, it was just it was so disorienting and so ungrounding for me, to the point where I literally bought a hotspot and I just was like, wherever, no matter where I am, I have a hotspot now and
Yeah.
that I can connect to give me my solid internet.
Yeah, it's like having that safety net in place, or like also like learn the hard way, right? The other day, like this happened 2 days ago, I was walking on the street and I somehow I had like a little baggie with my keys and my wallet in it. Well, I don't know if they got stolen or I dropped it, but it's gone. In a previous time in life, I would have like probably panicked and freaked out. But this time I was like, oh, okay, because like I planned for this now. I have the safety systems in place. So I go home and like I just put all my cards on hold. I already I have it like numbers. I have like copies of everything, which I didn't in a previous life do that. And I always keep one copy of a credit card in my house. So I was like, okay, this isn't ideal, but this isn't this isn't that big a deal. I hopped online, I put everything on hold, I ordered a new license. I'll be able to get it when I see some friends from the US. And like it's not gonna like tailspin my entire day. Right. It's like
That's
that's a structure that I put in place that keeps me feeling like really stable, even when things get a little bit out of control.
Yeah, and that's also super good advice. Like, have copies of, if you're going to live abroad, have copies of your credit cards, have everything easy to put on hold. Don't take all of your stuff with you all the time. And that's actually something that I've done. Like my passport, because I know it's like the most important document, that only goes with me if it absolutely has to.
Exactly. Yeah. And I use LastPass, which I'm sure a lot of people do. I have everything in LastPass.
Perfect. No, but and see, like, so that's a very practical, like to me, like grounding nervous system way that if, like, let's say, like the key ticket's gone, but you have that system in place where it's going to be okay. Like, I have copies of everything. I have these things so that it's not the end of the world. So,
Exactly.
that's really solid advice that any traveler really, whether it's forever or just for a time.
Yeah. Multiple credit, like losing, yeah, running out of access to money traveling is one of those scariest things.
Yeah, I didn't, I mean, I kind of did. I was going through something and I was just like really emotionally like overwhelmed and I left my debit card in the ATM and I only have one debit card. And so that was like, what? Because in Mexico, like you use cash for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't have a way to get cash for like 2 months. Like granted, like I figured out kind of like a workaround and everything to get cash, but still it was just like, shit, like I don't have access to get cash anymore, like in an easy, convenient way. And it was literally just because I was overwhelmed and I was moving fast. And we didn't know this in Mexico, some of the ATMs, they give you your cash before they give you your card. And so it's
Mm.
really, it's because it's that reverse like mechanism. Cause right. Cause you think, oh, I take my cash, like I already have my card, right? Cause that's how it is in the US. No, that was literally what happened to me. And then halfway through, I go, I left my debit card in the machine. Yeah, let
You
me
are
just
not
call.
the first person to have done that. I've heard that story so many times.
Yeah, I think that's kind of maybe it's kind of like a rite of passage when you when you live abroad. You know.
And then you learn like, okay, so I need to make sure I have like at least 2 copies or 2 ways to get access to cash. Or um, another really practical tip, I don't know if you do this, like I have a Google Voice number, right? Because my US number, I don't have access to it when I'm traveling. And they want to like send you a little, a little PIN number, and you can't access your phone when you're traveling. You can be kind of screwed because you can't get the code to get back into your accounts. So I just have all my bank accounts using like a Google Voice number that I can get through voice over IP. That has saved me many times.
Yeah, because it's like you just have to be on your computer. You don't have to have your phone, which is amazing. Yeah. Um, very good idea. Very, very good idea. Um, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about like the erotic blueprint, since I know that this is
Mhm.
something that you do with your work and you've shared with me that it translates everything. Kind of just sharing how like erotic blueprints, I know we touched on a little bit in the beginning, but coming back to it, like how do those erotic blueprints show up in travel and for people when
Sure.
they're traveling? Yeah.
Yes, I love this topic. So the erotic blueprints, if you're familiar with the concept of like the 5 love languages, the erotic blueprints can kind of be thought of as like the love languages, but of sex and intimacy and touch. So the erotic blueprints were designed in the context of sexuality and intimacy. And you are a person in a body, whether you're in the bedroom or traveling or at work, right? So it's very tied to like how your nervous system reacts to pleasure. It's how are you best wired for pleasure? So there are 5 erotic blueprints. There's energetic, sensual, sexual, kinky, and shapeshifter. And so I won't talk about as much about how that applies to your intimate life, but you can make the connections I talk about it in terms of travel, right? So the idea of each blueprint type is each of us has like one primary blueprint, but then we might also have like bits and pieces of other ones, right? So you can think of them as like a primary path to turn on and pleasure, also as different flavors that you can bring into life. So so the energetic blueprint, right? The energetic is someone who's really sensitive. They have like a more developed sense of like they're probably pretty intuitive. They're more sensitive to the energetic, the energies. They feel energies more. So a superpower of that is like they're super attuned, right? They can really feel things, and especially in the context of travel, right? That can be a lot. If you're on a plane or an airplane, you're moving around a lot. Like that's especially or in a big urban area. There's a lot of energy that you might be picking up on, and that can be really overwhelming. So what's helpful, I think, for an energetic to understand in terms of travel is like there's nothing wrong with them. Like they're not weird, they're not broken, they're not too much. It's just this like that energetic overwhelm where they kind of go into shutdown. That happens, right? So how to kind of like control for that? is understanding that you're wired that way. And so you need more time to ground. Like energetics can also be kind of like off in space, or they can have a harder time like grounding into their body. So it's like, okay, I need to like, if especially if I'm moving around, I need to have my feet on the floor. I need to go out in nature and like get my feet in the ground. Crystals, energetics tend to really love crystals. So like, and maybe you travel with a crystal that gives you a sense of protection or safety or grounding, or doing like, meditations or whatever it is that like helps you feel like I have a protective bubble, right, to control my space. And also listening to your gut. Again, like you don't have as much control over your space if you're moving around a lot. So if you get to a space and you're like, this just doesn't, you have that sixth sense, like this doesn't feel right, I don't want to be here. Instead of downplaying that and being like, no, like that's silly, or there's listen to that, right? That's your gut, that's you have an energetic sense that something's off. And really honoring that and saying, okay, I'm not, I'm not going to stay here tonight. I'm going to go find another place, or I'm not going to go down this street. Because every time you don't listen to that, you're telling your body like you're wrong. I'm not here for you. And then there's less pleasure, right? Because you're telling your body, I'm not going to listen to what you have to tell me. And you're potentially putting yourself in danger too, right? So it's really that listening. And on the energetic side, I've noticed like places like Hawaii, Bali, places like Guatemala with volcanoes, right? There's like those places that are like energy vortexes. Energetics like tend to flock to those places, right? Something about like the lava, the magnetism, the water, right? Those are very like energetic places. And you see a lot in the travel space, people going to these sort of spiritual centers. So the sensual blueprint type is really into like everything sensory. Like you talked about the smell, right? So for me, what is really attractive to the sensual about travel is that experience of all the senses being engaged, whether it's like art, music, architecture, food, right? It's traveling to like ignite all the senses. And if you're bringing yourself into the present moment, being aware of all that, the flip of being essential, whether it's, again, this is anywhere you are in the world, is that essential can be kind of in their head a lot. So yes, they have a capacity to be super in their bodies, and they also have a capacity to get stuck in their head. So for the sensual, it's kind of like needing that sense of order, right? So I'm a sensual, so I get this, right? So like I have packing cubes. I travel, if I'm backpacking, I travel with my own little sleepy sack thing. When I came to Argentina, I brought my own set of sheets and my own pillow. Like having those sensory things that make me feel like safe and at home. Or I travel with essential oils. Those are all things that make me feel like a sense of safety and order in my space, even when I can't control all of it. That helps my nervous system feel like safe and grounded when I have some control over the physicality of my space. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, no, definitely. And I found that like I do that in a way. I have a blankie that I travel with.
Yes, a blankie. Yeah, exactly.
I have a blankie. I just have wherever I gotta go, like, but it's a blankie that like I've gotten from the US. So it's something that I've gotten in the US and I just bring it with me. So like I had one, I have both of them now with me here, but I just have a blankie. It's like that's my thing that wherever I am, this is my thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, you're traveling, you're limited in how much you can take with you, but having those key things that kind of make a place feel like it's yours, it's home, or where you feel like the energetic needs is more focused on like feeling safe in their body. The sensual needs to feel like there's a sense of order. So those are the things to kind of manage for, as well as being aware of like what the superpowers of that type is in terms of what they can really enjoy and love out of travel. So the sexual type, the third type, is more focused on certainty. So we heard the word sexual, we think like in the context of sex, the sexual is the person who's more focused on like the climax, the orgasm, like what we think of as sex. When you apply that to more like day-to-day life, it's the person who's a bit more direct. They're to the point, like, right. So that's why I was saying that enjoying the journey of eating the pizza, because the sexual might be just like all about like, I want like get it in my mouth, I want to eat it, right? That's the pleasure is in the climax, the goal, getting the thing. So sometimes the potential shadow or limiting side of being sexual is not enjoying that whole lead up, right? Whereas like to use the example of the pizza, the energetic is like really enjoying the intrigue, the mystery, the anticipation, like, oh my God, it's going to be so good. I can't wait to, like that whole lead up is very pleasurable. The sensual is like enjoying the smell, like the texture, being in the pizza shop, and the sexual just wants to eat the pizza. But there's so much pleasure along the way in these different flavors. So for the sexual, it's like that sentence, they need that certainty of like, I'm going to get there. Right. So I make this joke like about, if you go to the Eiffel Tower or to Paris, right? The sexual is like, what's the top 5 list? I want to bang off the things on the list. Like, I got to know I'm going to get to the Eiffel Tower or I'm going to get grumpy. It's like, they need that certainty that they're going to get to the main attraction. And then they can then their nervous system can be like, oh, okay, we're going to get there. I can chill. I don't need to get like anxious that I'm going to get to the goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. It reminds me of people who like plan, like when people who go on vacation and
Yeah.
plan, they're like, I have to go there. Like, we're going to do this, 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 and we need to do these things. But that's like,
They need
I
the
don't.
certainty of like, yeah. And without that certainty, they get a little anxious. It's like being really hungry and being like, if I don't know I'm going to eat soon, I'm going to it's literally your nervous system is like anxious until it knows it's going to go to get what it needs. So keeping that's something that a sexual can keep in mind. And somebody else who's like traveling with or engaging with somebody is like, oh, they're not impatient, mean, whatever. Like this is just the way their nervous system needs certainty to relax. And then the 4th blueprint type is the kinky type, right? So we hear the word kinky, we might have ideas of what that means. It just means taboo. So taboo is like whatever feels kind of like naughty to you. And I think this is fun in travel because often in travel, we get chances to kind of play around with pieces of ourselves that maybe we didn't feel like we could express in our home environments, right? Personalities or ways of being that when we're in a different culture, it's like, oh, I'm going to try out, I didn't grow up in a culture that had dance, right? But now I'm in a place where dancing is, and it feels almost a little scary, a little naughty, like, oh, I didn't grow up in a culture where people dance like that. But now I'm in a culture where people do, and it's safe to try it. Or doing like adventurous things, right? Like skydiving or things that these are all the things that make someone feel a little bit alive because it feels a little bit dangerous or naughty or kind of playing with expanding their sense of who they feel that it's safe to be. So I think that's like when I think about travel, there's like a lot of room there to kind of like play a little bit with the edges of what feels comfortable. And that's how I apply this concept of kink to travel. It's like, how do I expand my edges of who I can be?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it kind of reminds me of people who will travel like for plant ceremonies or who travel to do like very specific things, right? Because some people travel to go to sex parties, like it's the same. Like, there's some people travel to like there's so many outside of the box, like societal norms that people specifically travel to do. So that makes like complete sense in my mind.
Yeah. Or even to like try out being versions of themselves that maybe in their home environments, like, everyone thought you were like the quiet, good girl, right? But there's a part of you that maybe has more than that. And in a different culture, a different environment, it feels safe to express that.
Yeah.
And then the final type is the shapeshifter, which is kind of like all of the above. Like they need a little bit of all of the above.
That's cool. Wow, this is really like insightful and really, really educational. You have a quiz around this, right?
Yes, there is an erotic blueprint quiz. I can send you the link.
Yeah.
It's like 10 questions and it'll give you your type or like the best guess at your type. And then you'll get a little email with a little more information about it. It's in the context of how this relates to sex. I've kind of framed it in the context of travel, but like I said, you are who you are no matter what you're doing, and having these like key understanding of like why you are the way you are is a concept you can apply no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely link it. Because I do feel like this is really interesting and for me, very insightful. Because I believe you, like, right? Like I am who I am no matter where I am. And so with that, knowing like just understanding, who am I? And I definitely, it was interesting because I definitely, when you were describing the energetic, I was like, oh, I think that's who I am because I am very sensitive to my environment. I do carry around crystals, and where I live right now, there's like a Mashika pyramid like at the top of the town. Like this where I live is known for being a very energetic healing place. And it's funny because when I was living in cities, now that I look back, like I was extremely overwhelmed, and it's just like I was always like, wow. And so I remember when I settled here, I was like, who would have thought I would have ended up in like a super like spiritual, energetic healing town? But now you just explained
It's
it.
not that shocking.
Oh, so good.
And yeah, the beauty of that is then giving you that permission, right? Like it's not that I couldn't hack it in the city or like it's no, this is just how I'm wired.
Yeah. And that is definitely what I lived in Mexico City for 3 months. And that gave me the opportunity to just really like, right before I moved here, it really gave me the permission to just explore, taste, experience. And I don't like the city life, it's just not for me, which was kind of a cool standoff, right? like to go into something different. So I really enjoyed that. Well, thank you so much for sharing. You like really shared such a wealth of information that I feel like will help any traveler, especially just embodying this whole day. Like I'm who I am wherever I am. So the more I understand that, the better I can set myself up for being the best version of myself wherever I am in the world.
Totally. You said that so beautifully.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what is the best way?
Email Ellie at beyondtheitinerary.com.
Beautiful. And I'll make sure that I'll put your contact information in the description. Okay.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ellie. And thank you all
Thank
for
you.
tuning in. Thanks all for tuning in for another episode of Roaming the Now. Until next time, enjoy wherever you are in the world.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Roaming the Now. And until next time, make sure to like and subscribe if you found some value in this episode, and check out the links in the description. You can find the link to get the Roaming the Now episodes delivered directly to your inbox in the description below. So until our next episode, have fun, live in the present moment, and enjoy roaming the now wherever you are in the world.